Welcome to The Explainer. I'm so glad you're here with us today because we are diving into something absolutely fascinating and, honestly, incredibly important. We're looking at what happens when government secrets, policies that were designed to stay hidden, are finally dragged into the light. Throughout this explainer, we're going to uncover how systemic, classified decisions have historically harmed the public and how analyzing the data can help us finally grasp the true scope of that damage. It's a heavy topic for sure, but uncovering the truth, that's the very first step toward understanding our history.
Okay, so let's dive right into this. We're pulling insights today from an unbelievable project over at the Columbia History Lab, spearheaded by researcher Matthew Connelly. What they've done is essentially build a declassification engine. Picture this: a massive, searchable database holding nearly 5 million declassified government records. By treating history as data science, they've been able to map out files that were hidden from public view for decades. It's literally revealing a completely new, behind-the-scenes story of post-war America and the concealed actions of the government.
But to really understand what this declassification engine is uncovering, we need to define exactly what we're talking about. The source material refers to this as the dark state. Now, quick clarification, this is definitely not the same thing as the deep state. The dark state specifically refers to government policies, research, and secrets that are deliberately shielded from accountability in public view. So for our explainer today, we're going to use this lens to examine 3 distinct historical injustices that operated completely in the shadows for decades.
Here's our roadmap. We just covered what the dark state is, and next, we'll walk through 3 distinct case studies: the Tuskegee syphilis study, federal Indian boarding schools, and the ugly history of redlining. After that, we'll wrap up by looking at how society's reckoning with this past today.
Section 1. The Tuskegee syphilis study, medical betrayal.
This first case represents an absolutely unbelievable breach of medical ethics by the United States Public Health Service down in Macon County, Alabama. And this wasn't some rogue, off-the-books operation. It was a decades-long, officially sponsored government study that deliberately deceived hundreds of vulnerable citizens. The final report abstract lays it all out, showing how 399 poor black sharecroppers with latent syphilis were lied to by their physicians. They were told they were being treated for bad blood, which was kind of a catch-all term back then for things like anemia or fatigue. In exchange for some free meals, medical exams, and burial insurance, these men became unwitting subjects in a study that was just designed to document the natural progression of the disease. They were given absolutely no actual therapy.
And the timeline here is just staggering. This non-therapeutic experiment went on for a shocking 40 years. It started in 1932, and it kept going right through the 1940s, even after penicillin became widely available as the standard, highly effective cure for syphilis. Government officials actually went to extreme lengths to ensure these men did not receive treatment from any source. No way around it. They were blocked. It wasn't until July 1972, when a massive front-page headline in the New York Times finally exposed the horror, that the study was shut down. By that point, it was the longest non-therapeutic experiment on human beings in medical history. An estimated 28 to 100 men died as a direct result of untreated syphilis.
Now, this isn't just some dark chapter confined to the history books. It has a profound, undeniable impact right now. The Tuskegee study casts what experts call a long shadow, acting as a powerful metaphor for racism in medicine and government abuse. Today, this legacy is a massive factor in why there's still deep suspicion between African Americans and the biomedical community. Studies point to this specific history as a primary reason for low participation among African Americans in clinical trials, a real reluctance to seek out routine preventative care, and a stark disparity where the need for transplant organs widely outpaces the supply of donations. The breach of trust was just absolute.
Section 2. Federal Indian boarding schools, cultural erasure.
Let's move to our second case study and see how this builds on that pattern of hidden harm. Drawing from a massive July 2024 Department of the Interior report, just take a look at this number: 417. That is the official, confirmed count of federal Indian boarding school institutions mapped across 37 states or then territories. Think about that scale. This wasn't some localized, small-scale program. It was a massive, nationwide system explicitly designed to systematically remove indigenous children from their families and their communities.
And this next statistic, it is truly devastating. The investigative report confirmed that at least 973 American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian children died while attending these federally operated or supported schools. On top of that, investigators have already identified at least 74 marked and unmarked burial sites across 65 different school locations. It's a heartbreaking reality. When you contrast the government's stated goals for these institutions with the stark reality on the ground, the true scale of the dark state's impact really comes into focus. See, the government framed these schools to the public as being all about education and assimilation. But the reality? It was a brutal system of forced assimilation that inflicted deep generational trauma and deliberately tried to erase native languages. Between 1871 and 1969, the U.S. government pumped an estimated $23.3 billion, yes, billion with a B, adjusted for inflation, into these schools. The damage was so incredibly severe that today, massive efforts and investments are required just to try and revitalize the cultures and languages that were targeted for destruction.
Section 3. The Ugly History of Redlining. Economic Exclusion. Shifting gears now to economic exclusion through housing policy. This is a practice that really took root in the shadow of the Great Depression, and it fundamentally shaped the geography of American wealth as we know it today. During the Depression, trying to help citizens buy homes, the government established the Homeowners Loan Corporation and the Federal Housing Administration, or FHA. But here's the catch, and it's a huge one. The FHA mandated strict whites-only policies to receive mortgage insurance. They actually concocted color-coded maps of urban areas, explicitly tying a person's race to their ability to get a loan. The riskiest areas? They were shaded red. And literally, even one single black person living in an otherwise white neighborhood rendered that entire area a redlined, high-risk zone.
So the crucial point to take away here is how this policy actually functioned in the real world. While the intent was supposedly to help middle-class Americans buy homes, the reality was a government-enforced system of rigorous segregation. Redlining blocked investment entirely, and we're not just talking about home mortgages here. It applied to commercial construction and business loans too. This setup created a perpetual economic death spiral. Businesses simply wouldn't build there, which resulted in massive food deserts and physical isolation, often through the construction of giant expressways that were specifically designed to box in and contain these redlined communities. Now you might think the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which made racial discrimination in lending illegal, would have stopped this, but the harm didn't disappear. It just evolved. Traditional redlining morphed into what's known as reverse redlining by the 1990s. Instead of just excluding black Americans from getting housing loans, predatory lenders started actively targeting them, especially first-time buyers and seniors, with these abusive subprime loans that were basically designed to end in default. We also see this evolution today in those sneaky fine print rent-to-own traps, which lure low-income families into making costly home improvements on properties they're ultimately just going to be evicted from. The legacy of those original government-drawn redlining maps absolutely lives on in these modern exploitations.
Section 4. Reckoning with the past. Impact and resolution.
So how in the world do we process all of this? We've just looked at profound medical betrayal, cultural erasure, and systemic economic exclusion. Now let's bring it all together and look at how legacy committees, researchers, and modern government reports are actually demanding action to reckon with this hidden history. Because declassifying the past isn't just about blowing the dust off old documents, right? It's about finding real paths to healing. The sources we're looking at outline very specific, actionable recommendations. For the boarding schools, there's a strong push for a formal U.S. government apology, the rollout of a new 10-year native language strategy, and a recommendation to reinvest over $20 billion into native and urban native communities, essentially matching the funds originally spent on trying to assimilate them. For Tuskegee, the Legacy Committee demanded the creation of a professional bioethics center to educate the public and properly train healthcare providers.
And what we see here from the Tuskegee Legacy Committee's report brilliantly illustrates the core of these recommendations. It clearly notes that when we talk about wanting to bridge the racial divide, an apology provides the crucial opportunity to actually begin healing the racial wounds that still persist in this country. It really underscores that formally acknowledging wrongdoing isn't just a nice gesture. It is the absolutely necessary first step.
The report also highlights this incredibly powerful quote from President Clinton made during his apology for Cold War radiation experiments. He said, "When the government does wrong, we have a moral responsibility to admit it." The Legacy Committee used this exact logic to secure a formal apology for the Tuskegee survivors. An apology in this context is framed not just as empty words to make people feel better, but as an active, vital mechanism. It's the foundation stone needed to even begin regaining public trust.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. We've gone through the data, we've looked closely at the declassified realities of the dark state, and we've explored the deep generational scars that got left behind. So the question we are ultimately left with is this: how do we actually rebuild trust when the past is finally declassified?
Acknowledging the truth is exactly where it starts, for sure. But transforming that dark legacy into a better, more equitable future, that is the ongoing challenge for all of us. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into a history we must never, ever forget. I'll see you in the next explainer.